Yeah, my little hip hop story, started back in the days. You know, I do kind of remember in the mid '80s here in Australia that breakdancing was on, and roughly remember it. Because back in those times I was really into Michael Jackson, and I was into all the '80s cartoons like Transformers. I was really into Transformers. I just had that autism where I just couldn't stop watching it. And Voltron and Astro Boy, Ghostbusters, and all the '80 movies. And it was really beautiful those times. Good childhood. There was a lot of challenges now and then, but I do remember that, like, Ghostbusters 2, there was the soundtrack. When I heard there's a song called Spirit by Dougie Fresh, and I remember the chorus line, and always that always kind of was inspiring towards my spirituality, and hearing Run DMC in the song, they're talking about Ghostbusters, and as a child, like hearing rap, that was kind of like my first time hearing rap in those times. So it was like kind of like the late '80s that I was got into rap, and during when I in the '90s, I heard Easy E, and that was like that blew my mind because I never heard swearing and all that, and it was kind of funny because Easy E had that kind of comic kind of outlook, and it was kind of like this genius comic in his music. So that was basically in the early '90s. I started to hear Public Enemy, Ice T, Easy E, Ice Cube, and those brothers kind of brought me close to hip hop. And that was roughly there. And then I later on, heard Bone Thugs and Harmony, which was like one of my favorite groups that standed out more. Because that was just so completely different to a lot of to the rest of everybody else. And then Wu Tang Clan and so many others that came, which I'll talk about in another, video. So that was like my hip hop kind of story that I'm just telling that um that I grew up with, in those times. But I remember here in Werribee there was a shop, and in that shop there was a lot of kind of rock culture, a lot of rock and roll, like heavy metal and all that stuff, which I like too. But they didn't have much hip hop. They had a little bit, and I remember the owner there used to get stuff like hip hop music from America, and he used to order it for me because I had the magazine, and then in the magazine I was like, "Can you get this?" And he would get it for me. And I remember I got Illmatic in those times from Nas, and so many other ones that I've got, that in those times it was cool. So it was really cool in those times, but there's so much to cover, in those times. That was kind of like my hip hop story that I'm just trying to tell is that I do feel that Easy E was the kind of who brought me into like hip hop was NWA. And then from there on, Public Enemy was another group that kind of I fell in love with these brothers because they were so different and the political and teach me so much. And I still go listening to them. They still help me with a lot of stuff that I go through in life. And that's just my hip hop story. That's a little hip hop story that I just try and just talking about right now. And hip hop has always been kind of my outlet, and you know, and I would have loved to make an album. I would have loved to make more songs. I used to have, just, you know, a little computer and makes music there, and I used to write rhymes and this and that. But I was always a big fan of the culture. I was always a big fan of the music. I used to love collecting the CDs and records. That was me. I just like to collect. I did write rhymes. I did make some songs in the computer and this and that. And I don't know if that's what I really want to do later in the future, is to do that. Now and then I'm always like to kick freestyles, and I like to do freestyles. I've done some freestyles on the video on my channel and other channels that I've got, and that's all I do. But to actually make a song and to actually produce something, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of work, but I'm just a big fan of the music. I just love appreciating. I just love listening to it. I love listening to just the old school stuff. I haven't heard much of the new stuff. The new stuff that's going on now. I'm an old school cat that just keeps on going back to the old school, and that's it, man. That's my little hip hop story. I'll probably make another one. And that's just some of the things that back in the days. So I came to Werribee in 1987, and you know, back in those times there was hardly nothing here, because I lived in the western suburbs in Yarraville and Footscray, went to school in Footscray. So yeah, I've always been a big fan of hip hop. I just love listening to it and just appreciate it. Now and then I would just like to, do little freestyles and this and that. I would love to produce something. I would love to do that. I'd love to do all that stuff. But my mind is just too busy just appreciating the old school, music from the 90s, a bit to the 2000s and stuff like that. I'm still listening to other things that I haven't listened back in the days. So that's all I gotta say. That's my little hip hop story. So peace out, take care of yourselves, and look after yourselves.